right. Well, I appreciate Nick and Lena's, and certainly we're going to wrap up this series. If you're new with us, the end of the book of Genesis is a story of a gentleman named Joseph. And this is not Joseph of the New Testament, the earthly father of Jesus, but we've been walking through his life. And Nick gave you this summary. He's been through so much, but yet one key word is he stayed faithful. So the tagline that we've used for this whole series is staying faithful in the unexpected. And there's not a person in this room who's going through life something hasn't come upon you that was not on your plans. It was not on your expectations. It interrupted where you're at. And certainly Joseph, from the dysfunction to the betrayal to becoming slave to the imprisonment to being forgotten, all those things were not something he expected, but yet we see him staying faithful. And today we want to look at that last chapter, Genesis 50, on he finished strong and how he did that. So this message kind of takes a little turn. We've kind of really did the overview, finished last week, of his life per se, but this one, how does he finish his life? How does it end? And if you look a little bit ahead, some of you, it's like, well, for some of us, not too far ahead for our future. We think our life may be ending. For some of you, it's like many, many, many years. But something has become common as a phrase for us called the bucket list. How many of you in this room have a bucket list? Okay, so about a third of you do, a bucket list of things. These are things that I want to do. There was a movie that came out several years back of two guys that thought they were terminal and the things that they needed to get done in their life. But the bucket list of things I think, before I die, this is what I need to do. And I think it's kind of fun to look at different people's bucket lists. And so I did. And the list go on and on and on and on. And some of those were I want to catch a wave surfing. I want to go on a dog sled. I want to ride a zip line. Those were kind of fun. One of them was I want to ride an airboat across an alligator-infested swamp. I'm sure it's on all your lists there. I want to go hang gliding. I want to go skydiving out of a plane. That's on my list. I want to eat fire. I don't know why that comes up there. I want to jump off a cliff. I want to ride in a hot air balloon. I want to walk on hot coals. Some people are weird. And then I want to swim with dolphins. I want to swim with sharks. One guy wrote, I want to wrap a snake around my neck. I don't know why that. Hold a monkey, hold a tarantula. And then go on, like, I want to see the Great Pyramids of Giza, Great Wall of China, Taj Mahal, Colosseum in Rome. There's all those things. I want to do this. I want to see this. I want to go there. But what is it that you want to do, think about in finishing your life? What is the most important? And for all of us, there's a point we just need to sit back and realize that life is fragile. None of us are guaranteed we're going to live to 115. But life is fragile, and it can change in a moment's notice. It is not to be depressing today, but just kind of a reality check. Just stop and think about it. A tragic car accident could happen to any of us in a moment's time and interrupt not only your day, but end the life. Realizing that things can come along, that heart attack that you had no idea how that could come on so quick. Or just that random, all of a sudden the doctor says that undiagnosed tumor was worse than we thought it was going to be. And just some crazy act of violence that may be going on in our society around us. We're going through life at any age. It could end, and it's not meant to live a life in fear, but certainly a life to live, say, this is life. And this is what I've got, and there's no guarantee to the end. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 12 says, no man knows when his hour will come. You don't know. It could come at any time. And when it comes, are you ready? Are you prepared? Well, none of us will be completely ready, but still, how do we finish out this life? If you knew that today was your last day, if you knew today was it, you got the next several hours and that's it, what would you do or say or prioritize in your life? What would be some things you'd go, oh, whoa, I need to get this done. I need to go here. I need to say these. So oftentimes when someone dies suddenly, the conversations around, well, what was that last day? What did he say? Where did she go? What happened? And there's something about that last day we put a lot of weight in, but every day that we live is significant. Genesis 50, as we look at the end of his life, Joseph's life, verse 20, the verse that Nick read earlier, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. That summarizes his life, realizing all kinds of bad things happen, but God is working through it. And then on verse number 22, basically between the point where they all arrive in Egypt and now the end of his life, 50 years pass in this one verse. Verse 22, Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all of his father's family. He lived 110 years. Lived to be a ripe old man here, we'd say. But all that time, what happened during those 50 years, we don't really know, except he lived there, and we do know that he continued to live faithfully. So we jump forward that 50 years and we say, what are his final words? Now again, if you're new with this, Joseph's become a real important character as we walk through this. I encourage you to read the last several chapters of Genesis to understand who this man is. But this guy stood through a lot, and this is how he wraps up his life. Down in verse 24, then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised an oath to Abraham, that's his great-grandfather, Isaac, his grandfather, and Jacob, who is his dad. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So his life is all brought together. It kind of comes out of this, and some of his brothers are still alive, and he gets them together and says, you have to make a promise to me. And that promise was going to be passed down for many generations. Many generations it says, remember, Egypt is not our home, and there's a promise that God made that I know he's going to be faithful to, and I want us to remember it and never forget it. So the Hebrews, they were living here for 50 years, and they were going to live here for almost another 300 plus years. For a long time, they were going to live generation after generation after generation. Now, at the time of Joseph, they were a favored group of people, because Joseph was recognized by Pharaoh as someone important that accomplished so much. They were given a really choice piece of land in Goshen where to live. So they were living there, they were doing well. Joseph married he married the daughter of a very important man. That could change the story, wouldn't it? So he married the daughter of a very important man there. So he kind of married into prestige, but also he was the number 2 in command of Egypt. He was recognized as a really significant person. No doubt he had wealth, he had recognition, he had some fame. And so even though his life was at the extreme bottom for a long time, now he is at a place of prominence. His family was recognized that way. So the Hebrews were doing really well. When he says, we are going to go back to the land where we came from, I'm sure some of them thought, why? Why would I want to go back and be shepherds in that land when life is going so well here? But there was a promise given by God. And Joseph not only believed the promises of God, but he wanted to be obedient to God no matter what. A year ago, last summer, in June of 2018, we had a friend come, Jeff Walling, and he preached on this very passage about the bones. He talked about that scissor reel, and some of you may have been here, and that the promise that why was this important to take his bones back? But it's recognizing we don't belong here. Even though Joseph been there a long time, says, this is not our home. God has called us for something more. All this great success, he never forgot about who he was and his home and where he's going. And many, many years later, almost 400 years later, Moses comes along. We see that in Exodus 13. And Moses says when they are leaving Egypt, the whole group of people says they go and they get his mummy out of that Egyptian coffin, and they take his bones and they take him with them back. And then we see Joshua, along as Joshua's coming to the land and conquering the lands, it says he takes those bones to Shechem and he buries them there in Shechem. If you go to Shechem today, you will find there's a tomb set aside to remind us where Joseph was buried. So the summary of Joseph's life, I'm just going to pull his life together, how he ends, what are some things for us? First of all, we see that it did not include any bitterness in his life. Of all the things that he'd been through, he ends his life, there's no sign of bitterness. It's going on. He was betrayed, but he didn't become bitter. He was tempted, but he didn't fall into temptation. He was forgotten, but he didn't turn away from God. And at the same time, when he had this reunion with his brothers, he didn't seek revenge upon them, but he was able to maneuver through those hardships of life and not become a bitter person. Too many people go through life, and there's highs and there's lows. And you've been around older people. You come along and they've been hurt, they're scarred, and they just have a bitter spirit about them. And I've told you before, I remember as a young child, there was a lady in the church who looked like a grandma. I thought she was a grandma. Grandmas are always supposed to be sweet, always nice, and she was mean. She was just angry all the time. And I couldn't figure out, why are you so bitter? I remember as a young youth minister going into a grade school and interacting with the kids, and some of the teachers there were just mean, and they were angry. And I thought, how sad, because you went into teaching and education because you loved kids. And something happened through the years, and you no longer loved them, but it seemed like they resented the kids that were in their class. And it can happen to any one of us. Because life goes through and it doesn't exactly go like we expected. Some things interrupted and we get somewhere and we're going through life when you find yourself getting cynical and getting angry and getting mean-spirited, and the things that come out of your mouth are not one that reflects the joy and the presence of God at all. Joseph had so many things go against him. So many things go against him. But yet still, he comes out and he's not bitter. He was able to turn around and say, God had a promise, and he gave it to my great-grandfather, and he's still going to work that promise. And even when he was at the very, very bottom of it all, what kept him from getting bitter? It's because of his faith. Because he believed God was with him no matter what. And he understands that things can come harm. As we read the verse, Jesus says, in this life, there will be suffering. Life does have problems because it's full of all kinds of fallen people like you and me. But in the midst of it, God says, my presence is there. And last week we talked about his providence, that he's going to continue to work through everything. If you believe that, then you're going to trust him. And you're going to be able to go through life and not become this bitter person. Abraham was given a promise. He didn't see the promise fulfilled. Isaac was given the same promise. He didn't see the promise fulfilled. Jacob did not see the promise fulfilled. Even Joseph didn't see the fulfillment of all the promises of God. But none of them became bitter. Some of us, you have these goals, these achievements, things that you think need to happen. You may not see those get happen, but there's a dream that, oh, God is faithful and he'll continue to work through other generations, even after we're gone. But can you say, I can get through life without being bitter? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31 says, get rid of all bitterness and rage and anger and brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. That's not saying if, it's saying you, me, because these things are going to come upon every person in this room. It says you can get rid of it. How do you get rid of it? Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. So somebody's done something horrible to you, has betrayed you, has done something like happened to Joseph and lied about you, ruined your reputation. How do you go on? How do you not get bitter? It says you forgive them with the same grace that God gave to you. So you're able to say, this person, I can't forget, they're mean, they're done wrong, they're awful, they changed my life, they've hurt me, they've taken something away from me. But you can say, I will give them God's grace because I don't deserve God's grace for me either. When you're able to do that, Joseph obviously is able to do that. Then we're able to go through life without bitterness in our life. Another thing about Joseph's life is we did see that it did not include his success when it came to the end of it. He was very, very successful at the end of his life, but we don't see an example of his pride being shown. We don't have him seeing, or we don't see his life saying, look what I've achieved, look where I've at. You guys should do all this stuff for me. And some of us, it's not the hard things of life that knock you down, but in reality, you've had some great success. You've done really well. And all the things you've come out of, and you come out of this side of life and say, I've accomplished a lot. And I'm really doing well. And look where I'm at. And your pride has gotten so big that when people around you, you want them to recognize who you are, but they see you and your success far more than they see God working through your life. They see all the things that you've accomplished, but still, who are you? Is your identity in your success and in your claim of fame, or is it in Jesus Christ and recognizing who he is? Joseph didn't take any identity in his position or his status. He took his identity with God. We also see he took it with his family. He's still hanging around his brothers, those guys that were such a mess. But he had his identity in God where it should be. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 is a verse that just says this. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, which richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Those of you in this room who've accomplished so much and done so well, congratulations. Remember, God was the one who was able to help you do that. And can you recognize his presence in your life and say, my claim to fame should be I'm a follower of Jesus more than look what I've accomplished. Another thing about Joseph we see is it did include his family. His family are around him. The few verses there between 20 and 24 that we didn't read was talking about how he had his great-grandchildren come and sitting on his lap, and he's talking to them and basically giving a blessing over them. His family was still important to him, even though they were a completely dysfunctional family, had all kinds of issues, all kinds of problems. It's interesting, when he had his sons, he's married to an Egyptian. He takes on an Egyptian name. He's got the demeanor of the role, the job that he had. But when his sons were born, he chose Hebrew names for his sons. Now, that wasn't the most popular thing to do because they were recognized as second-class people. But he wanted his kids, his family, to remember that God was the provider for them, not his job and not the money that was around him. Always remember who you are and where you're from. I guess it comes down to what are we emphasizing, not only for ourselves, but for our family. Is the main identity that you want to establish for your family is your name and your accomplishments or your address? Or is that we are followers of Jesus Christ? Recognizing that this is what's most important. Joseph had his family around. Even the people that were so messed up, he's still talking to his brothers. The relationship was there. And we see that his legacy is going to last for generations because his legacy was about his faith, not his position, but his faith. Psalm 71, verse 17 says, "Since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come." Is that true for you? Are you saying, God, the most important thing in my life is that I declare your goodness to the generations coming after you? Now, some of you are parents, some of you have grandchildren, some of you don't have any children, but there's still a next generation. There's still a next generation around you. And do you see your important role that this author seen that wrote Psalms is that the important role that you have is declare God's goodness to the generations that are coming after you. Joseph did that well. One more thing, just in summary of his life, is that it did include his faith. He trusted God. He trusted God through all things. He stayed faithful. There in chapter 50, a couple of things in verse 24 and 25, he says, God will come to your aid 2 times when he's talking to his family. Don't remember, God is with you. Don't forget, God is with you. And God's going to be with you. And God's going to help you. He believed that God keeps his promises. Always. He's saying, Egypt, this is not the end of the story. Sure, you may have accomplished a lot. You got a nice address. You got a lot of good stuff in your bank account. But he says, this is not the end of the story. There's something coming that's so much bigger, so much better that we need to remember to stay with. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22, that great Hall of Fame chapter in the book where it talks about all these heroes and their faith statements, says this about Joseph. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions about his bones, saying when all of life is done, he says, don't forget God's promise. They're always true. And we're going to go back and live in this land where he's told us we're going to live, and it's going to be true, and don't forget it, and let my bones always be a reminder that that's the place where we're going to end up. Is that something we are emphasizing to people around us, saying the end is always in front of us. God's promises are always going to come true. Tom Rainer wrote a book, it's called Eating with Elephants, and in that book he interviewed Billy Graham. And Billy Graham said this, you see, we are not called to be successful, we are called to be faithful. And sure, there's something within us that we want to accomplish, we want to do well, we want to get ahead and do all those things. But remember, the most important thing is you are called to be faithful all the way to your last day. So what kind of a legacy will you leave? When your life is done and over with, when people look at your life, when they talk about you, what kind of a legacy is going to be there? Joseph's legacy, well, there's all the trouble that came, all of his fame, But when it comes down to it, what's his legacy? Saying we're going to go back to the promised land. God's promises are real. His legacy is a man of faith, a person that's believed in God no matter what. Some of you may have read the old book, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. It's a fun book, and there was a movie that came out many years ago, and I watched a little clip of it this week. It's just fun, where they think Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, these two friends, are just some very, very mischievous. They think they're dead, and so they have a funeral for them. And they're there, and the whole little church is just crying over them and saying all these great things about these mischievous boys that are there. Well, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn walk in the back of the church when that funeral's going on, and they're sitting there, and they show them, and they're just crying and sobbing because they don't know who they're talking about, these two wonderful boys. It all comes together, and there's this reunion, and Aunt Polly's ready to smack them both, remember? But what if you were to attend your own funeral? I'm not trying to get morbid here, but just think about it. What would people be saying about you? What is it, the comments that they're going to make? What if you could attend your own funeral? What is it going to be said? Are they going to be talking about, man, she was mean, she was bitter, she was all these things. He had so much, he wouldn't share anything. He did this. They had such a hard life. It's just really sad. Life was just so hard for them, and just that's where it's left. Just sad, just sad. Are they going to say, look what they went through. They went through these struggles. They went through these high points. But the thing that stood out most about them was they were joyful. They loved Jesus, and they were faithful. So what will be the summary of your life? Summary. Just all summarized down. So if we were going to say one thing about your life, if you're going to do a little assignment this week, maybe in your small groups you can do this. If you're going to summarize, what is the one thing that you want written in your obituary? When they say, he died, you're born here, died here, she did this, she accomplished this, what is the one thing that you would love for them to say about you? Now, we have a lot of pictures in our family. My wife loves pictures. We have oodles and oodles and oodles of pictures. I'm so thankful digital came out. That just really saved me a bunch of money. But we have all kinds of pictures of our family, of your life. But what picture are people going to remember of you? And when they think about your life, what thing's going to come to mind? There may be a special memory that's going to be out there. Is it going to be the memory of the most extreme, audacious, the time you completely lost your temper? When you completely went off over here? Or is it this? What is the picture going to be? And what is it that it should be? What is the summary of your life? Is it going to be about bitterness? Is it going to be about how you put other people ahead of you? Is it going to be about someone who was so strong in their faith and walking with God? See, Joseph did well. He was able to forgive those who did wrong against him. He was able to trust in God. He believed in the providence of God. And we can cope with the disappointments that come in this life if we look at the fact that Jesus is the one who's walking through it all. And recognize that God is with us. Everyone is going to have heartbreaks and setbacks and things that didn't end up in your life like you thought they were going to be. But are you able to live faithfully? And what are you able to pass on to your children and your grandchildren? Another verse that Nick just read earlier was Psalms 100 verse 5. It says, for the Lord is good, and his love endures forever, and his faithfulness continues through all generations. There's some things in life that Joseph, he really wanted to end up back in the promised land because that's where the promises of God were for, but he didn't see them. But he believed that God is faithful and that God was going to provide for them, and someday it was going to happen. There should be some prayers in your life that you're praying for your own life. You're praying for your family. You're praying for people that are close to you. You're praying for the next generation and realizing I may not get to see this, but your concern is that even after I'm gone, God is still working and God is still going, and I'm investing in something that God is going to continue to work in even after I'm gone. Because God's faithfulness continues. Your faith, you can trust God throughout your life. But will you trust him as you end your life? Now, for younger people, you're just going, I don't know. But get a picture of the long marathon that's ahead of you. I'm going to run this long race. And what I'm doing now is preparing me for where I'm going to end. But some of us in this room, we have to think, okay, I got so many years left. How am I going to finish these last years? Whether it be 2 or 20 or 30. How am I going to finish these years? What's going to be the most important thing ahead of us? Some of us, as we get closer, begin to get this fear and this apprehension, and you kind of take it back a little bit, like, oh no, what's going to happen? Can it remind you of Psalms 23, this verse, that passage that so many of us know so well? Would you read this aloud with me? It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. That God's with me. So do I have to fear death? No. Realizing I get my relationship right with Christ. I have the promise of the faithfulness of God, that he's with me. Even to the point of when I'm approaching death, I don't have to fear death. Realizing there's something so much greater and so much further beyond this. In fact, I just let you know now that year 2020, we've been praying about, God, what should we do? What should our focus be? And we're going to be focusing next year on eternity. And what does that mean? And what's going to happen to us when we die? What happens to us when we cross from this life to the next? What's heaven like? What's hell like? And what does it mean to have an eternal perspective of life? What happens if everybody in this room truly, fully believed, I'm going to see Jesus face to face, and how would that change your perspective and your priorities in this life right now? And we're going to take some time. We're going to really delve into that. Because we look at this life and all that there is, how am I going to finish this, knowing that something so much greater is coming ahead? People are going to be buried. God's faithfulness continues. I'm awaiting Jesus' return. I believe he can come anytime, and I'm so excited to see Jesus, but we need to be faithful no matter what. And what are you doing investing in the next generation ahead of us? And how are you, as your soul, right with God today? John Quincy Adams was late in his life, and he was asked, a person came in, and he's really old, having trouble with his life, and he's saying, how are you doing? And his reply was this: John Quincy Adams is well, sir, very well. The house in which he's been living in is dilapidated and old, and he has received word from its maker that he must vacate soon. But John Quincy Adams, he's well, sir, very well. He was able to live with purpose. He was able to live with the right priorities, saying, I'm supposed to be faithful in this life, do all I can, the best I can, but it's a temporary life. And someday, I'm going to be with Jesus face to face. And one more question for you. What are you giving to those that are coming after you? What are you giving to others? What are you investing in? Now, it's important. We did a little trust seminar recently. And, how do you get your life affairs in order, your finances and all that? But beyond whatever may be left in the bank account, there's something so much more important. Joseph, he was saying, you make sure you take my bones back and you remember the promises of God, and God's going to be faithful, and don't you ever forget that God is with you no matter what. He stayed faithful through obscurity and temptation, dysfunction, all those things, and waiting, and he stayed faithful even through success. He was always faithful. Some of us do well when times are hurting, but when success comes on, you actually venture off and you go over here. When people look at your life, and they say, my dad, my mom, this man who influenced me, this lady who stood out, they were faithful to God always, no matter what. He finished well. The greatest thing you can do is you pass on faith to those that are coming after you. That they would see this person who loves Jesus no matter what. One thing about life, it's a sprint. It's not it's not just a sprint. It's not something you run real quick and hard. It's a marathon. You're going to be faithful all the way through. You never stop. You keep on going. Sure, you get tired and you get worn out, but you're going to keep on going. And I love the illustration of running the relay race. You get this baton. And somewhere in your life, you were given a baton. And I don't know what your parents passed on to you. They may have passed on this heritage of faithfulness. They may have passed on to you this joy in life, this purpose in life. They may have passed on to you the best baton ever. But in reality, many of you in this room, the baton that was passed to your parents was not so great. It might have been filled with bitterness. It might have been filled with pride. It might have been filled with all kinds of issues that have left a deep scar on you. And this was handed to you, and you're thinking, really? This is what I've got? And you have the decision to make, what are you going to hand off to the next one? What are you going to pass down? It's really easy to take all that dysfunction, all that happened to you. Joseph could have had all those 13 years of pain and wallet and bitterness, and that's what he passed on to others, but he made the change. Some of you, when you've received great, it's easier to live in that and pass it on, but for many in this room, what you were given was handed to you, the same as what was handed to Joseph. from this incredibly messed up, dysfunctional family. And you have the choice to say, where's the faithfulness of God? Can God change this? And his answer is, oh, yes. And you received his faithfulness, and can you give something to your next generation that is just full of the grace and the faithfulness of God, and that your kids or those that are around you, those that you're influencing, the next generation can look at your life and say, no matter what came in his life, no matter what happened to her, look how they stayed faithful to God. Look at their words, look at their heart, and that's the thing that I want to pass on to others. Joseph finished well. Some of us really do well for life, and then we trip up and we fall and we stumble before the finish line. And don't do that. You keep going, no matter what. We are to live faithfully and finish this life with purpose and with meaning. Every person in this room. And you begin that now. Young, middle-aged, older. Say life has purpose and life has meaning. So at the beginning I asked you, at your funeral, when it's all done and said, what are people going to say about your life? What is it they're going to say? They can say, oh man, bad, sad, hard, different. They can say, look at the things that they accomplished. Look how successful they were in this world. Or they can say, despite fame, despite success, besides the heartache, she was a person who loved Jesus and believed in the providence of God. And that's the greatest thing that you can pass on to the next generation. God, I'm thankful for your love and your grace. I'm thankful for this man in the Bible gives us an example of heartache and pain and difficulty, but was able to remain faithful. And Father, I pray that you would bless each person in this room. Give us a wisdom today. You said if we lack it, we can ask you and you'll provide it. God, we need your wisdom. Some are facing some difficult decisions today and this week. God, we need your wisdom. Some are wrestling with pain and difficulty and heartache and trying to find you in the midst of it. And God, we need your wisdom. Some are struggling with purpose and meaning and direction. And God, we need your wisdom. So we're asking you, God, to move in our hearts, in our minds. Give us the courage to step in faith and walk with you. Father, I pray that you give us time today and this week for a little introspection, that we can stop and think about our life and purpose and where we're going. And Father, I pray that you give us a new zeal, a desire to honor you and lift you up. And Father, that we would have purpose and meaning. And Father, I pray that you give us the opportunity this week to interact with someone in the next generation, to influence in them with your love and your grace. So Father, would you speak to us now as we respond to you? It's in Jesus I pray. Amen. God is faithful